Okay, so welcome back to the videos of the Hee-Haw Donkey tutorial. This is actually part 2. This is the second of 2 1-hour videos that I've done that sit alongside the downloadable tutorial. It's also available exclusively to start with for my patrons over on Patreon. And this video, obviously, there's another video there already for the first hour, which goes into all the foundation layers of the watercolour pencil, up to adding the water, to start the colour blocking all over and commencing of the fur texture. So at this point, we've already worked the ears in the previous video. We've colour blocked all the way through. We've restored all of the refinement that we lost when we added the water. We've also put in the detail around the one eye. So now we are going in and starting to what I call burnish. So I'm zooming in here. If you look at the first video, you would see a lot more tooth of the paper showing through at this point. But because we've been building up the layers with all the colour blocking, now we can cut back in with sharper pencils and start to work our way from the back forwards. So obviously we've done the ears first because the ears sit at the furthest back. We've also done around the mane. So now we start at the furthest point away, which is obviously the top of the head, and the fur around the top of the head is quite soft and fluffy, and it's also usually where the light catches the fur. So most times it's going to be quite reflective up there, with donkey fur being more soft and fluffy, quite coarse as well. It's not like we're drawing a black shiny dog with light hitting the top of the head, so there will be a definitive shine line across there. Oh, just here, just see, I'm just cutting back in. You basically, that first layer of light pencil, we're flicking back out in over the ear, over the mane, and then we just want to cut back in with the shadow. Almost the negative areas around the fur lines that I'm putting in there, the fur flicks. I'm not very technical with my terminology. We call that flicking of the pencil that's going on there. So here we've got the caput mortem. We've used burnt ochre around the top and the ivory or cream. So you do that first top area, and then we're literally going to work our way down, sort of 0.5 centimetre to 1 centimetre at a time. So the caput mortem is going in there now. So the caput mortem violet. Just putting in the shadow, the dark areas. There's some dark indigo in there as well. So again, we're just popping back in the shadows, just making them more intense. If the shadow isn't there to start with, same as on the ears earlier, when we flick the light pencil over the top to create the fur texture, there's not enough shadow underneath to create the depth, and nothing for the light colours to sit over the top of, really. It'll just sort of look really flat and wishy-washy. So just doing a little bit of work around that right eye now. Obviously in the reference photo there's not much definition on that right eye, so it's more of a hint of what's there. So again, just follow what you can see, zoom in on your reference photo. There is the lashes, and again also around there as well you've got the overlap of the other donkey in the background. So you just need to learn to look closely at, go back to your line drawing, see what was there in the line drawing, see what belongs to this donkey and what belongs to the other one. So again, exactly the same process as we've used up over the ears to build the fur. Put in your darks up to your lights. The lights will go over the top now. See where we've got that layer that we put in, the second layer down of the darks, the caput mortem violet and the indigo. We're now going to flick over the top with the lighter colour pencils, and we're going to work our way down to the next layer. There goes the burnt ochre. All the way down into the eye. Wherever you can see it in that area, just pop the colours back in. We lost a little bit of the shadow, so we just put that back in again as well. Again, where it becomes a solid block, just cut back through super sharp pencils with the Morton Violet and the dark indigo. Black if you need to, but the black is a tiny bit harsh at this point. So again, we've created that furthest point away, which is that brow there. We're just softening it up now where we've got the grainy lines. We're using the light flesh just to soften those lines. And there's the warm grey going in there to soften it as well. You'll gradually see that tooth starting to disappear and it becoming much more sort of joined up really and smoother as a piece in whole. Using the white there and also the black just to give it a bit more density, contrast and definition. So you can just about see a black pupil peeping out there from around the side. Obviously we're going to flick some fur up over that eye at some point as well. There we go, we're going down the edge, burnishing that area with the light flesh. Obviously if you want to use the ivory or the cream, if you see more of that there, use the colours that you're starting to see. Hopefully you should be starting to pluck out your own colours now. If you feel you need to reach for another set of pencils, if you've got more of the Albrecht Durers or your polychromos, prismas, whatever you've got, if you want to add in different pencils here, just go for it. Obviously, you know, this is following strictly the tutorial that I put together and the materials list in that tutorial, but if you want to stray and now you can see those colours yourself in the reference photo, really just go for it, honestly, because that's what I want to teach you to see. Yep, following mine is great, but this is what I see and this is what colours I use. Hopefully you have your own palette range in your mind how you interpret this. So again, a little bit more burnt ochre coming down over here. Some more of the Morton Violet. Obviously you've discovered by now that the Morton Violet and the dark indigo are two of my most favourite and most used colours. So here, where the warm grey has softened it, we just want to, again, create more depth. We've put the shadow back in now using that Morton Violet. And now, because we've got the shadow, we can go in with the light flesh, and here I've got the ivory and the white, and we're just going to flick, again, technical term, flick those hairlines into and over the top of the dark shadows. And when I say flick, what you do, practice this on another sheet. I put the pressure at the first point of contact when I put the pencil down, and then I flick away. And as I flick away, I lift the pencil so the pressure comes slightly less, and that's why you get a slightly thicker line at the start and a thinner line as you lift away. It's just for this texture of the donkey. I use the same method for other types of fur, just if it's longer and smoother, obviously you keep contact of the pencil on the paper for longer. If it's short and stubbly, you sort of stab the paper with the pencil. You might use slightly blunter if it's a softer fur. It's all practice. I know some people do draw their fur, and it doesn't matter what type of fur it is. It's all drawn in the same style and technique, but to me that's not depicting the true fur belonging to that animal. So it's just practice again, looking, feeling and depicting of the fur of that specific animal. Here I have gone back in with the black, literally just picking out some of the really dark shadows in that reference photo. Just taking it all the way down through the nose, getting that placement back in where we've lost it, where we've gone over it with all the lighter colours when we've been burnishing. Going over again now with the burnt ochre. It's colour blocking, still colour blocking, but what it is each time it just gets more refined and sharper pencils and slightly more precise placement. And like I say, that fur texture is the last thing that we work on. That's just the flicks going in over the top. Some Venetian red there going in as well. Just touches again where we've lost it, and I can see it in the reference photo, shouting out to be placed back in. It's quite fascinating for me actually sitting here doing the voiceover at a later date. It's quite interesting watching myself and how I draw. It's quite an interesting project maybe to set yourself, see if you can just set up, even if it's just with your phone, just record some of yourself drawing and play it back. It's the same with your reference photos. As soon as you pop your reference photos up and next to your drawing, if you can get like a split screen on your monitor, or if you can use the photo editing app and pop them into a collage where they're both the same size, your reference image and your drawing. Maybe even have a third screen open where you can edit your drawing up in the contrast, up in the hues and the values, just to see how much further you can take that drawing without actually making the adjustments in real life. It's quite good if you line them up, because you instantly, anything that's not quite right jumps out at you. See, I've slowed this right down now to normal time, real time, just to show that where I'm placing those shadows that I've lost. Basically, that huge chunk of fur going up over the top of the head is long and clumpy, and we just want to create that effect that it is. It's deep shadow in there to make it's a long fur. It's not just sitting up on the surface like being about ½ an inch long. It's a good, sort of like a couple of inches, possibly longer, some of this fur. So we want that depth, we want that chunkiness. Got the light flesh and the ivory. Got a terrible habit of probably holding several pencils in my hand at once. Not a habit that I advise people to take up. It's just something that I obviously do without realising. Now I'm watching the video, I can see it. Like I say, it's a valuable tool, all of these things, watching yourself back. As long as I don't have to listen to myself back, that's okay. You can see where I've put all the initial lines down. I'm just going back in now and just tweaking them. Again, this will be tweaked over and over. Usually I work a whole piece to about 95% completion. I don't fully finish an area, and then that allows right at the end to go back in and balance things out, so you can adjust the light direction. You can just make sure you've got a good balance of the colours, the contrasts all over, rather than at the moment you are sort of like blinkered and are just viewing that small area that you're working on at that time. Just going back through it once again with the burnt ochre, and over the top with the sharper pencil just to cut through all that pigment and create the fur texture. When we work on different types of fur, like we're going to do sort of a glossy short-haired fur, I'm going to work on a horse as well. Horses are completely different again, because there's no real long fur. There is fur there, of course, but the depiction used from the pencils of how to do a horse and a really short-haired dog is completely different to obviously doing something like we've done the Black Spaniel before, which does have short fur in some areas, but mainly it's long and glossy. Another tutorial that is coming up as well will be Mocha Pup, which is the little brown, reddish brown chestnut, I'd say spaniel puppy that I'm going to be teaching in America. That one's going to be coming up, and he has got all different types of fur. Yes, he's got the long curly spaniel ears. He's also got the soft smooth fur with lots of highlights and the light hitting over the brow and the head. Lots of beautiful colours. He's got a long white bib of chest fur. He's also, being a pup, he's very soft and fluffy, whereas older spaniels, unless they've just had a bath, they're usually, the curls are more defined, more set, like he's had a set at the hairdresser's basically with his rollers in. Okay, so working down over the fur that's over the top of that nose now, where it's quite stubbly and a little bit of curl to it as well. Just repeat of the process that we've already done now. You've got your shadows in there. You're going to go over the top with your burnt ochre, your light flesh, your ivory, burnishing it back. And then where you lose any of the shadow, you just cut back through again later on with your dark indigo, your molten violet, possibly your black. At the moment we're just getting colour and the soft fur texture coming through. And there we go, cut back through. I'm actually using the black here just to cut back through to that shadow. Cutting back up from underneath, see that clump of fur sits over the top of the nose, over the top of that bone that runs up to the eye socket. So we want that feeling of dark shadow underneath and that light fluffy fur flopping out over the top. Obviously, again, the camera is zoomed in so that the actual picture is larger than the actual drawing itself. So it's going to look a little bit less smooth, let's say, a little bit rougher than it does actually look in reality. You can tell from the size of the pencil there, it's about twice the size of what the actual pencil is in real life. Okay, so just rotating, creating that shadow coming down through. It comes back up obviously into the caput mortem. Slightly softer where it meets the top of that nose. I've got the Pablo, I'm using the ivory. It's a real sort of transition from where the fur begins out of the top of the nose. It's more like whiskers turning into fur right at the top of where the actual naked skin is. But even that skin of the muzzle is covered in lots of tiny fine hairs in reality. Obviously we're not going to depict all of those, but we just want to give the feeling of, it's both rough and smooth, the skin. There's texture to it, but it is actually smooth. I don't know if you've ever felt a horse's or a donkey's muzzle, but it's like velvet. So there's texture there, and it's really soft to the touch, but it actually probably looks coarser. I suppose it's a bit like when you look at snake skin. Some people imagine snake skin to be slimy, and it's not. It's dry. And I suppose quite leathery, but it's not the image that people get just from viewing it. They think it's going to be wet and slimy, and it's not. It's dry and scaly and textured. So like I say, it's just thinking about the textures you're drawing, and if you can get a hands-on feel for what you're drawing as well, like sounds mad, but when I see dogs, I always try and, in the street and on walks, I always say, you know, it's okay to say hello and stroke them. And what I'm doing when I'm doing that, not just looking at the colour and obviously saying hello to a gorgeous doggy, I'm also feeling the texture. Spaniels, feel their ears, feel the weight of their ears, feel the curls, look at the light hitting those curls, look at the fur direction, feel their muzzles, stroke their tops of their head, ruffle the tops of their head, see how long that fur is, the depth of it, size and shape of their eyes, shape of their noses as well, colours of noses, the pigments of noses varies so much, especially in cats and dogs, and some of them have their own individual markings. It's all, every animal is unique, and that's why I think using exactly the same style and technique for every animal that you draw is wrong. It's okay, it's a way of depicting it, it becomes your style, but I don't think it's particularly specific to that animal that you're drawing at the time. Here you can see I'm just blending and burnishing over, softening that transition where the fur meets the top of the nose. I've got the warm grey there just burnishing over. I've also used the ivory and the light flesh. So speeding up again now, I'm just going down and repeating that process that we used around the top of the head and working from the back forwards again. I've used the ivory and the light flesh on that top layer, and then the ochre, and then flicked back out into it using the darker colours, which is your indigo, the Morton Violet and the black. Working our way forwards, I've popped a bit more of the mauve back in there, more colour blocking down through there, popping back in the indigo for the shadows all the way underneath, and there's the Morton Violet again, colour blocking in the shadows, and then with the light flesh I'm going back in and picking out the highlights, back in with the black just to map in the dark shadows again. It is literally light to dark, picking out those areas, and you can see what difference it makes. It's starting to build that rough fur. Okay, there's a little bit now that strays from your actual tutorial. I didn't include these pencils in the tutorial itself, only because I was focusing on drawing the donkey and the fur texture needed for the donkey. Here, if you want to put in a fence post, you can. If you wanted to take out the bottom part of the neck and literally make that a stone wall that he's leaning over, you can. Obviously there's a metal bar in the actual original reference photo. I've just popped in a fence post. I did include a little picture of the fence post in the tutorial if you wanted to use that. It's just a greenish brown weather stained piece of wood with a bit of wood grain in there. So I think I've used like an earth green, and I've used a few of the colours mainly that we've got, plus a couple of cool and warm greys in there. I've used the walnut in there. Literally going in the direction of the wood, then burnishing over the top with the greys and also with white, and then obviously when you add the water then you're going to get a much softer look. And also when I add the water on this, you see there's burnt ochre going in there, and that is one of the pencils that you've got. Going over it all with grey now as well. So when you add water, as I was saying, where you've got the grey over the top, remember you're going to get that soft colour. And also I know I do work this piece of wood whilst it's wet. I'm just getting this piece of wood done now because that cheek fur area, I can't come down any further with my flicky light bits of the edge unless that wood's in place. I need to work over the top of the wood, so it needs to be there. There you can see now that I'm really fully burnishing the whole lot of colour back with the grey. Popping back in a little bit of the dark indigo again, just for the fur direction. Again, practice this. This is something I kind of make it up as I go along, but just practice it because you'll learn what's going to happen when that water hits those colours that you've just put down there. Okay, so in with the water brush, sweep over the top, dissolve all of that wax. Just sweep, sweep, sweep. whatever you do, don't blend up and down, because all you're going to do is smudge all that pigment up into each other and you'll lose the direction of the actual wood. Got some green gold in there as well. So that's all the water added there. Now, whilst it's damp, probably wetter than I would say for the fur, because I actually want to go in there and push all this pigment around, because we're creating a different texture. We're not creating fur here, we're creating the wood. So I've gone back in with one of those light warm greys, whilst it's still really wet, and just pushing the pigment around. You can see how wet it is because you can see the water as I push the pigment around on there. But again, it's just burnishing it back here. I've allowed it to dry a little bit. It's still quite damp, but it's a little bit drier. I'm just going in there now with another layer of the grey. Some of that walnut brown going in over the top, just to put that I was going to say fur direction in there, but just to put some of the wood grain in, some of the obvious lines. Another thing you can do here is I'm just like literally dropping that pigment in. You can, it's literally just kissing the paper, and where it's damp, pigment's just lying straight on there. So again, you can smooth over this with your finger or with a blending tool, a blending stump, if you want to. Or you can just use the pencils to do the blending. Again, one of the dark greys here, or a Payne's grey, or dark, one of the warm greys, but in a darker shade, so a warm grey sort of 5. Now I'm going over the lighter areas with the white. As it gets drier, you can get a softer pigment layer going down over there. Obviously I've added this into the video. I didn't want it to be the huge focus, because the tutorial is obviously the donkey itself. But just to include it, because it is actually obviously in the finished piece. You can see there how much that is just softening back the colours underneath. You can also see how much that pigment, how easily it's being released there as well. Cutting through the texture as well, just to create a little bit more roughness. Obviously when this is dry you can go back, and if you want to add even more texture you can. And there you go, I did smooth it with my finger there at the end. Again, this layer's drier again, it's possibly a tiny bit damp there, but I'm still able just to push a bit of pigment around. So we've let that piece of wood dry. It looks like I've worked over it a tiny bit more, and now I can go in and do my flicky edge. I think that'll become my new technical term, the flicky edge. And hopefully you all know what I'm talking about when I say the flicky edge. So again, repeating exactly what we've done before, I'm softening it all back with the warm greys and the flesh on the outskirts, possibly with a bit of ivory on the really lightest outer edges. And then the next layer in, it's like the top of the head working down, but from the outside of the cheek we're working inwards. So the light part, and then we're flicking back into that with the Caput Mortuum violet and the indigo and the black. And now I've just switched back up to work our way. We've got that edge there, so it's like filling in the space between the shadow along that nose line down to the edge of that cheek. You notice that the fur on this cheek is quite purplish, but with a real grey tone over the top, grey layer of fur over the top. So different coloration than it is to the actual top of the head. So again, placing back in our shadows, and now I've slowed it down. I'm just going to pop the burnt ochre over our outer layer. exactly like we did around the top of the head. So each layer just means there's more pigment on there and the sharper pencils all cutting through. And every time we lose a little bit of the shadow or a little of the placement, just slow it down, take it back, get that pop back in there, same as where we lose the colour, slow it down, take a moment, do a little bit of colour blocking and place it back in there. Obviously look closely at the fur direction each time you're placing your pencil down. His cheek fur is obviously growing downwards, but he's got his chin on that fence post that we've given him, or the railing that's in the original photo. So it is pushing that cheek up and out a tiny little bit. So we popped our shadow back in, we're going back over now with the burnt ochre, just to get the colour back in. Gradually working our way up the cheek and from the edge and down the cheek from under that main bone line running from the nose up to the eye socket. So that's the light flesh that I've just used all the way down through there. As the fur goes down around under the chin, there's just an impression of the fur under there. So again, artistic license as to how much of that fur you want to show. So we've gone down with the light flesh, and we've popped back in a little bit of the intensity of the shadows using the Morton Violet. And now moving up to the next layer, we'll go back in and accentuate with the light flesh again, using the flicky edge again in over the top of those shadows. Look at the angles of the fur here as well. As you work out from the muzzle, just look at the direction. This first line follows the line of the mouth as it comes up towards the cheek. Just carries on almost as the same line, and it's the same as, see that shadow line there that I'm just above that burnt ochre, there's a shadow line that follows the line coming up around the side of the mouth and continues. And you think about it, the long nose and jaw of a donkey or a horse, if you look at it sideways when it opens its mouth, that jawbone carries on up the side of the face to the joint of the neck. So you don't suddenly, just because the muzzle, the white part comes to the edge, you don't suddenly stop the direction of the shadow and the bone structure. It continues up underneath that fur, and that's what those shadow lines are. That's why it's really important that you've got those angles correct all the way up from the eyes down to the end of the nose. I hope that makes sense. So here, just working against the fur direction, just to cut back up into the fur. Real light touch here. Working up around the join of the fur along the side of that muzzle now. There's a real deep shadow just at the edge there, just under where my hand is now working. Again, this is where you've got that clump of fur coming over the top of that shadow. You want to blend those tones right the way down the side of the muzzle, so hence why we've got that burnt ochre coming down through. But we still need to make sure we've got the definitions of those shadows following the bone structure. This area is going to take a little bit of work. We need to intensify the shadow underneath, but also obviously we need to get these flicky highlight fur textures over the top of the shadows. You'll find as you go on, you're going to need to start adding slightly more pressure as well with your pencil. Again, it's just feeling for the Pastelmat, feeling for the grip. In some areas you'll have more grip where there's less pigment down. If you can't feel the grip, just push a little bit harder with the pencil until you can feel it. Again, it's still the same flicky method of more pressure at the base of the piece of fur, the hair, and then lifting and flicking away. It's all about just looking carefully at each area as well. You're just drawing shapes. If you lose your way a little bit, obviously step back, walk away again, come back to it with fresh eyes. Zoom in on areas, do that thing where I've said sort of spot the difference, and use the method of split screen on your phone or on your screen of the PC or a laptop, just to do a comparison. You can do that at any point, anyway, part of the way through. Just if you feel like you're losing your way a little bit, obviously, step back, fresh eyes, do a comparison pick, and you should be able to see where something is obviously wrong, where you've just lost your way and what you need to pull back again. It can be terrible. We do get very blinkered. We keep pushing on through, especially if there's a deadline. But a piece like this, you're working on this for yourself. So just get it right. It's only practice. It doesn't have to be exact, but we want that basic form, we want the structure, we want the texture, and preferably we'd like the colours to be quite good as well. It all comes from practice, the rest of it, and looking and interpretation. But these basics are going to be the principles that you use in every piece that you approach. So obviously I did that all real time so you can understand what I'm doing and why. So we just sped it up a little bit more there, and that's pretty much all that fur in place now. We're working our way forwards now to the closest point. So first of all, just get that edge of that muzzle marked in, the whitest part. I've got the white Pablo there using, but just use your white Albrecht Dürer if not. Excuse me. And this is really light-handed now, coming over the muzzle. It's just giving a hint of the colour, the texture, and what we're going to do is go over that with the white and the warm grey, and that will burnish it back and soften it. So there's just the hint of the colour. You see that we've got that mauve. It's exactly like we did when it was wet, to be honest. We went over it all whilst it was damp with the white, and that sunk back that initial quite bright mauve colour that was underneath. This will do exactly the same, so just pop in your texture. And then we're just going to burnish over the top. It's a little bit more work where that fur joins meets the transition, let's say, towards the nose. We're using the Nougat here. Nougat's lovely because it's almost brown, it's almost grey, it's quite soft, so it's great for those sort of in-between shades where you don't want an actual grey, you don't want a cold. It's quite a warmish colour though. Excuse me, I just need to cough again. I think I need to remember, if I'm going to be talking for an hour, that I need to bring some some throat sweets with me, so I do apologise. Okay, so if you look closely at the muzzle, there is direction with all of these lines that we're putting down. Now these sweep up over and around the inner side of the muzzle, and then across we've got directional lines going across horizontally, sweeping up around the nostrils, and then in the middle they almost like come down into a heart shape, a V shape in the centre, and they're almost vertical, the lines coming down through there, but there are also horizontal lines cutting across the front of the muzzle as well, further down between the two nostrils. But again, when you burnish it back, these will sink back and just become more texture lines. They look quite harsh at the moment. Again, if you're not quite sure, just practice on a spare sheet so that you understand. You've got your base layer there. We're going over with the nougat, and we're just going to burnish over the top. Again, this is really light pressure that I'm putting on here. I'm not pressing hard to leave these marks at all. There's a lot of tooth still on here, so it's gripping my pencil quite well. Up around the top, when we do the burnishing, different areas, you've got the whitest parts, which is where you'll use your white pencil, which is around the two nostrils and along the top, the bottom edge of the lip. But up around the top areas, you're going to be wanting to use your warm grey and also the ivory to blend and burnish with. Okay, so here I'm going in over the top. So now, when I say small circular movements, feel for it as well. I'm just circular movements over the actual pigment that we've just put down. Obviously, I'm just marking in here as well the skin that I can see coming through underneath the brighter areas. A few extra highlights just to bring it forward. Here I'm keeping the pencil actually on the paper now. As you see, as I move it, it is sinking those lines back. So again, the white's coming down around that area of that nostril, because that is the one of the brightest areas. Again, use that method of squinting your eyes and you'll see the highlight areas. But again, if you, right back at the beginning, if you edited your photos into colour and enhanced the colour to make the colours pop, and also if you edited it into a black and white version and up the contrast, this will show you again where your highlights truly are and where your deepest shadows are and your midtones. So those tools you use right at the beginning, you can use all the way through. You can see how well that pigment is still going down over those layers that you've already got down. And now you should start to see the effect as well as I go in these next few pencil strokes, how much you can sink back those marks that we put down with the nougat. Again, down out over the right hand side of the muzzle. That's again another bright area. I love it when you go over with a white or an ivory or a light flesh and burnish, because the colours that you've got underneath that can be sometimes quite intense or quite dark, this softens it back and just creates a completely different texture altogether. Perfect for doing the muzzle. As you can see, I'm taking the white as well in the direction of the lines as well, so that I'm not, if I went up and down there, I just smudged that dark pencil up into the next level, and it would just make a dirty mark. So I don't want to, I'm trying to follow those lines as best I can to keep them in place, but also still burnishing them back. So this is that V shape that I said about that's sort of formed there. It's almost like a heart shaped up around the top of that nose of the highlight. And then obviously the muzzle gets darker as you come down through the front. Quite a lot of pigment building over there now, as you should see. Just plucking out, there's a little bit of a highlight there around that nostril. Instantly makes that nostril pop forwards. But it can only pop forward if you've already got the dark in there to start with. That's why I say about working dark to light. Really light touch here again now, just placing in some of the finer highlights. See how instantly those lines soften and smooth. But you don't lose all of those colours, all of those undertones are still there. That mauve, the indigo, the violet, the ochres, they're all still there, but just soft, soft, soft. Making sure I'm rounding the shape up and around. Going in with the ivory now as well, so where it's not, basically we're putting the grey down over here as well. Remember I said we'd use the white, the ivory and the grey. As you come down over the front, you want the warm grey coming down through there. Okay, so going back now, we're just going to rework up into the muzzle area. Again, I'm putting in a few darker contrasts here. Slowing it right down with using that nougat again. Just placing in those markings. There's some fabulous markings on the front of the muzzle. Someone did actually tell me what it was called. Where the hair comes out from the muzzle on a horse, it's called a whirl. So obviously where the whiskers are coming out of the front of the muzzle, hopefully they're called whirls as well, but they're the little round circles, the dots that we see. So there's lots of those over the front of the muzzle, and of course there's the whiskers coming out as well. So exactly like we did across the top of the nose, where we put in the marks, and then we burnish them back. We're doing exactly the same here on the lower part of the muzzle now, in around those nostrils, the texture of the skin coming out, the shadowy skin coming out over the top edge. Just looking at finer detail with each pass of the pencil now. It's like on the first sweep, you know, you put in the basics, then the next sweep, you just enhance those a tiny bit, and then each time just tiny bit more refinement. See here, I'm actually sort of adding in more texture now for them, picking out the actual shapes. If you just break it down into shapes again, it sounds strange, but whenever I look at a donkey's nose, I always see an alien face smiling back at me. You've got big alien eyes, and then the shape of the muzzle where it cuts in, and then the big alien smile. So that's what you're drawing here, a big alien face. So now that I've said that, hopefully you're not looking and trying to draw a donkey nose. You're drawing an alien face. But you're not, you're just looking shapes, textures, angles, colours, contrast, just rotating your way through all of those things, plucking them out, putting them down onto the paper, and refining it every time. Obviously, if you wanted with this picture, if you wanted to work it bigger, or if you want to carry on and on and on, adding in more and more details, refining further than I've taken it, please do so, because it's all good practice. Obviously, I had to do this to a certain time restriction, really, because it is for a tutorial. I want people to be able to achieve it within a reasonable time. I don't want it to be too demanding that people sort of give up partway through. I want them to at least get some of the areas finished, even if it's just the ears and a bit of the nose, just so they understand the fur, how we lay the fur down in layers, and obviously how we can burnish and soften areas, and how to work on the Pastelmat and how to use the watercolour pencils. There's lots of reasons behind this tutorial, but like I say, if you want to take it more in depth, more detail, then that's up to you. That'd be great to see your results as well. So here in literature, I'm just feeling my way around. I often refer to my pencils as dancing across the paper when I work. If this wasn't for a tutorial, I would be a lot more chaotic in how I work. It's like something, if I see something, I tackle it there and then. If I see a colour that's missing, I tackle it there and then. I can be dancing all over the paper. Working on this, my other tutorials, obviously I'm trying to do it section by section and with a lot more logic behind it, so I hope that it is working for you. The feedback on the first video from you guys has been great, so thank you. So obviously they can only improve from here. Obviously with the next lot of pledges, I'm hoping to upgrade and get a desktop system to be able to convert the video. So obviously it's not just the making the video as I draw, which takes up more time, because it's just making sure you've got the cameras set up, changing the memory cards, downloading moving the film footage across. It's then the editing, the first run of which points do I speed up, where do I cut it, and then obviously I need to add in some extra imagery, then sit and do the voiceover, and then once you convert it, that can take 1 to 2 hours to actually get it to convert, which I'm hoping a new computer, faster computer, will speed that process up to minutes, I hope. As in, I'm just speeding this video up now as well. And then obviously to upload, I'm using some of the pledge money where I've rented this office space with super fast broadband, and now rather than it taking me a couple of hours to upload a video, it's taking me a few minutes. So you see that I've just popped some ochre back in there as well, and some of the violet. Pops in the whiskers as well. Building the layers, like say from the chin, I've worked from underneath forwards. little bit more burnishing over the areas here, picking out the highlights again. And I've gone in here with walnut again. I'm also burnishing with the walnut now because it's almost like a mid-tone. See how sharp that pencil is now as well. That's the warm grey in there. Going in with a few flicky whiskers with the white. Super sharp again. And you notice I've got my pencil at an angle. You don't go in straight down with the pencil because you'll break the nib. See, I didn't like those lines I put in there then, so I've just hid them away a little bit. So one last sweep now, just adding in some of the darker contrast. A little bit more colour placement of the burnt ochre where it feels needs it, just to balance it. We're just balancing now, little tweaks all over, looking at the picture on the whole. A little bit of burnt ochre in around under that chin, around the lip. A little bit of enhancement of the contrast, the shadow of the mouth. So it looks a lot lighter in the actual video than it does in reality because I've got a big daylight lamp over the top glaring, so it looks a lot softer in the video. In reality there's a lot more contrast in there. So you can see here I'm just picking my way around with that pencil held at an angle, just feeling away around the paper, feeling the tooth. Again, you say you could just keep working this. So here I'm just doing a little video just to show top to bottom of how much we've done with all the fur, because we're coming up to the end of the video now. So there's a pretty good balance all over that I'm happy with. I'm happy with the textures. So one last thing, we go in with the knife. Now with the knife, hold it upside down so we're not cutting, and you always have the paper so you can move the paper. You want the knife to be held so that you can pull it or move it in the direction that is best suited to your natural movement of your hand. So if it's up to the right and away, do it that way. But here you see I just turn the blade upside down. It needs to be a nice new fresh blade as well. So I'm just going to zoom in here because you couldn't quite see what I was doing. So there, see there, I'm just cutting through that pigment, and this is finer than any pencil line can create, and you just add in that extra layer of thick coarse fur texture over the top. And here obviously I've got white paper underneath, so it will be white that shows through. If you're working on the darker Pastelmat, it will be the darker. So with that principle in place, just speeding it up here. You see I'm just turning the paper, and you see how much I'm cutting through all of that fur detail that we did like earlier on. And it's just created that much more. Here, just a little bit of low tack tape, framer's tape, just to lift off any pigment that's slipped off around the edge. Also, it's best to anchor your paper here if you're doing it. So, we're coming up to the end of the second part of 2 hours, 2 1-hour videos for this Hee Haw Donkey project. And I really do hope you enjoyed it. If you're watching this and aren't already signed up to my Patreon, please do head over to my Patreon channel. All the details are in the comments below. And also over there, if you sign up for the $10 reward, you will also get a copy of the full downloadable tutorial. So there we go. Here's Hee Haw number 2, just lifting off a little bit more of the pigment, and we're all done. Thank you for watching. But for now, thank you very much for watching.